The sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden hue over the small town of Maplewood, Ohio. Inside the bustling diner, the air was thick with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and sizzling bacon, a comforting blend that had become a part of the town's heartbeat. Lily maneuvered through the crowded aisles with a practiced grace, her hands deftly balancing 3 plates piled high with eggs, pancakes, and crispy hash browns. She weaved past tables filled with chattering locals, the familiar sounds of laughter and clinking silverware, creating a symphony that filled her with a sense of belonging, at least for now. "Hey, Mr. Thompson, your usual?" Lily called out playfully, approaching the corner booth where the grumpy old man sat, his brow furrowed in concentration over the morning newspaper. He looked up, peering over his glasses with a mixture of annoyance and amusement. "Don't you have anything better to do than to bother me, Lily?" he grumbled, though a hint of a smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. "I swear you're going to drive me to an early grave." Lily set the plates down in front of him with a flourish, her grin widening. "Oh, come on. You know you'd miss me if I didn't. Besides, who else would keep you company while you sulk over your crossword puzzles?" He huffed, shaking his head. "You think you're funny, don't you? Just wait until I start charging you for my time." "Please, Mr. Thompson," she retorted, leaning casually against the booth. "Your company is worth at least a cup of coffee. I'll even let you have a free refill today." "Just don't spill it on my newspaper," he warned, his voice gruff yet playful. "This thing costs more than your paycheck, you know." As she turned away, she couldn't help but chuckle. Their banter had become a daily ritual, a strange companionship forged through years of exchanges that danced between annoyance and warmth. Mr. Thompson was a fixture in the diner, a constant presence that Lily had grown accustomed to, despite his irritable demeanor. He was a man of few words, but the words he chose often struck a chord, resonating deep within her. After what felt like an eternity, her shift finally came to an end. The diner had emptied, leaving behind only the sound of the coffee pot gurgling in the background. Lily slipped into her car, the familiar scent of her air freshener wrapping around her like a comforting embrace. She leaned back in the driver's seat, staring out at the parking lot bathed in the soft glow of the setting sun. With the engine off, silence enveloped her, allowing her thoughts to drift. She had dreams, big dreams, of leaving Maplewood, of escaping the small-town life that felt more like a cage than a home. She wanted to travel, to explore the world beyond the borders of her mundane existence. But every day, the weight of her routine anchored her down, reminding her of the responsibilities and the ties that kept her rooted in place. "Maybe someday," she murmured to herself, the words feeling like a promise wrapped in hope. But as the shadows deepened around her, the reality of her situation loomed larger, dulling the spark of ambition she held tightly to her heart. Suddenly, a commotion erupted from the diner, the sounds of raised voices cutting through the serene evening. Curiosity piqued, Lily swung the door open and stepped out, the cool air hitting her face as she made her way back inside. The atmosphere had shifted. Patrons whispered in hushed tones, casting worried glances toward Mr. Thompson's usual booth. "What's going on?" she asked Mike, a fellow server wiping down a table. "Did you see Mr. Thompson? He's been acting strange all day," Mike replied, shaking his head. "More irritated than usual. I think something's bothering him." Lily felt a twinge of concern. "What do you mean? He's always grumpy." "No, it's different this time. He's been snapping at everyone, even the regulars." Mike leaned closer, lowering his voice. "I heard him mumbling about something that sounded serious." Lily's heart raced. Mr. Thompson had his quirks, but he never let on about anything personal, always keeping his past shrouded in mystery. "Maybe he just needs a little space," she suggested, trying to dismiss the uneasy feeling creeping up her spine. But the whispers grew louder, and the tension in the diner was palpable. She glanced over at Mr. Thompson, who sat alone, his face clouded with a storm of emotions. He stared into his coffee cup, his fingers drumming impatiently on the table. For a moment, their eyes met, and Lily could see something dark lurking behind his usual gruff exterior. A flicker of fear, perhaps, or a weight of regret that he hadn't yet shared. "Lily!" a voice called, snapping her back to reality. It was Clara, the diner's owner. "Can you help me close up? We need to make sure everything's in order for tomorrow's rush." "Sure," Lily replied, her mind still lingering on Mr. Thompson. She stole one last glance in his direction before turning away, her thoughts swirling with questions. What could possibly be troubling him? Why did he seem so different today? As she helped Clara clean up, the unsettling atmosphere hung over her. The chatter of the remaining patrons faded into the background, their faces blurred as her mind raced with possibilities. What if something was truly wrong? What if Mr. Thompson needed her help? "Lily!" Clara's voice broke through her concentration once more. "You okay? You seem a bit distant." "Yeah, just thinking," she replied, forcing a smile. "I'll be right there." But as she wiped down the last table, her thoughts remained anchored to Mr. Thompson. She couldn't shake the feeling that the grumpy old man was hiding something significant. It was a feeling she couldn't ignore, a nagging instinct that urged her to dig deeper. As she stepped outside into the cool night air, the stars twinkling overhead, Lily found herself glancing back at the diner. A sudden chill ran down her spine, leaving her with an inexplicable sense of foreboding. What if this was the last time she would see Mr. Thompson? The thought made her stomach twist uncomfortably. "Get it together, Lily," she whispered to herself, shaking off the unease. But deep down, she knew that something was off, and the weight of that knowledge settled heavily on her shoulders as she drove away, the diner fading into the distance behind her. The sun rose lazily over the small town of Maplewood, casting a warm golden hue that filtered through the windows of the diner. The smell of freshly brewed coffee and sizzling bacon filled the air, a comforting routine for the morning patrons. However, a strange undercurrent of worry rippled through the diner as Lily prepared for the day ahead. She glanced at the clock, noting that Mr. Thompson had yet to arrive. It was unusual for the grumpy old man to miss breakfast, especially on a Tuesday when he was known to grumble about the state of the world while devouring his usual plate of eggs and toast. Lily wiped her hands on her apron, feeling a knot of concern tighten in her stomach. "Hey, Sam," she called out to the cook, who was flipping pancakes with the ease of someone who had done it for decades. "Have you seen Mr. Thompson this morning?" Sam paused, glancing towards the door, then shook his head. "Nope. He's usually here before the rush. You think something's up?" "I don't know. He seemed a bit off yesterday, more irritable than usual," she replied, trying to shake off the feeling of unease. The regulars at the diner, mostly older folks who came to gossip and share stories, began to murmur among themselves. Lily caught snippets of conversation, all directed towards the empty booth where Mr. Thompson usually sat, a testament to his presence in their small community. "Maybe he's sick," one elderly woman suggested, worry etched across her face. "Or maybe he finally decided to take a vacation," another chimed in, chuckling lightly, but then frowning at the thought. Lily's heart raced at the idea of something being wrong. She leaned against the counter, biting her lip as she stared out the window, half hoping to see his familiar figure trudging up the sidewalk. She'd served Mr. Thompson for years. His snappy comments and sarcastic remarks had become a part of her daily routine. Despite his gruff exterior, there was an odd comfort in their banter. As the morning wore on and the diner filled with the sounds of clinking cutlery and cheerful chatter, the absence of Mr. Thompson loomed larger. By the time the lunch shift rolled around, Lily couldn't shake her growing concern. She decided to keep an eye on the door, hoping against hope that he would walk in, grumbling about the weather or complaining about the service. But the door remained closed. When the clock struck 3, signaling the end of her shift, Lily felt a strange pull towards Mr. Thompson's house. It was a decision born from instinct rather than reason. She wiped down the tables, her mind racing, with thoughts of what she might find. As she locked up the diner, she could no longer ignore the gnawing worry that compelled her to check on him. The drive to Mr. Thompson's house was filled with a mixture of anxiety and determination. The streets of Maplewood were familiar, lined with quaint houses and well-kept gardens. But today they felt different, more foreboding. As she parked in front of his small, unassuming home, her heart pounded in her chest. The front yard was overgrown, the grass needing a trim, and the porch light flickered uncertainly, as if reflecting her own doubts. "Okay, Lily, you can do this," she muttered to herself, pushing the car door open and stepping out into the cool evening air. The house loomed before her, its beige siding peeling slightly, but it had always seemed like a cozy refuge for Mr. Thompson. She walked up the creaking steps, her breath hitching as she reached the door. It was ajar, a detail that sent a chill down her spine. "Mr. Thompson?" she called out hesitantly, pushing the door open wider. "Are you in there?" Silence answered her, and her heart raced even faster. She stepped inside, glancing around the dimly lit living room. Everything looked normal at first glance. His old recliner was still positioned in front of the television, and the coffee table was cluttered with newspapers. But as she moved further into the house, she noticed something that made her stomach drop. There were signs of a struggle. A chair had been knocked over, and the coffee table was askew, the papers scattered across the floor. A sense of dread washed over her as she took a few cautious steps forward. Her instincts screamed that something was terribly wrong. "Mr. Thompson!" she called again, her voice slightly more urgent now. She walked deeper into the house, her eyes darting around for any sign of him. The kitchen was dark, and the familiar smell of burnt toast lingered in the air, but there was no sign of life. Lily felt a cold sweat break out along her brow. "This isn't right," she whispered to herself. She turned to leave the kitchen when she spotted something out of the corner of her eye, a small, crumpled piece of paper lying on the floor next to the overturned chair. She knelt down to pick it up, her fingers trembling as she unfolded it. The words were jagged, hastily written, but they sent a shiver down her spine. "They're coming for me. I can't stay." Panic surged through her. Who was coming for him? What had he gotten himself into? Just as she was about to turn back towards the front door, a noise echoed from the back of the house. A soft thud. Lily froze, her heart pounding in her ears. "Mr. Thompson?" she called again, this time more softly, fear creeping into her voice. The house was silent again, save for the faint sounds of the wind rustling outside. Taking a deep breath, she decided to investigate. She moved cautiously towards the source of the sound, her mind racing with possibilities. As she approached the doorway leading to the back of the house, she could see the light switch on the wall, but it didn't seem to work. The shadows crept closer, and she felt a surge of courage mixed with fear as she stepped into the dimly lit hallway. "Mr. Thompson?" she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. The hallway seemed to stretch on forever, and she could feel the chill of uncertainty in the air. A feeling of dread settled deep in her gut as she reached for the doorknob. She turned it slowly, her heart racing as the door creaked open. What awaited her on the other side was a darkened room, filled with the remnants of Mr. Thompson's life. Old boxes, dusty furniture, and the faint smell of something long forgotten. But as she stepped inside, her eyes caught something that made her blood run cold. A broken window stood wide open, the curtains billowing in the breeze as if the house itself were exhaling. A few shards of glass lay scattered on the floor, glinting ominously in the fading light. "Mr. Thompson!" she called one last time, her voice filled with desperation. But only silence answered her, a void that filled her with an overwhelming sense of dread and fear. As she stood there, reality began to sink in. Something terrible had happened to Mr. Thompson, and she was determined to uncover the truth behind his mysterious disappearance. Lily stood at the threshold of Mr. Thompson's house, her heart pounding in her chest. The police had arrived shortly after she reported her findings, but their lack of urgency only deepened her sense of dread. Officer Jenkins, a sturdy man with a bushy mustache, had examined the scene with a skeptical eye, while his partner, a young woman named Officer Davis, took notes in her notepad. "Nothing seems out of the ordinary, ma'am," Jenkins said, shaking his head after a cursory glance around the living room. "The door's ajar, sure, but that's not necessarily suspicious. He might have just gone out for a walk." "But there are signs of a struggle," Lily insisted, her voice rising in frustration. "The overturned chair, the broken picture frame. He wouldn't just leave like this." Officer Davis looked up from her notes, her brow furrowed. "We'll file a report, ma'am, but until we have more evidence, there's not much we can do. People disappear sometimes. It doesn't always mean foul play." Lily felt a chill run down her spine. The thought of Mr. Thompson, the grumpy old man who had become an irritable fixture in her life, simply vanishing, sent her mind reeling. She had known him for years, had served him countless cups of coffee, and through their bickering, had formed a bond that was as frustrating as it was comforting. "We're just trying to help," Jenkins said, his tone softening slightly. If you think he's in danger, you should reach out to his family or friends. Friends? She scoffed, crossing her arms tightly against her chest. He doesn't have any. He's always been alone. Then we'll keep an eye out, Officer Davis replied, her voice steady. If you see anything unusual, call us. Lily nodded, though the officer's assurances did little to ease her anxiety. As they left, she lingered at the doorstep, staring into the dimly lit house. The silence enveloped her, a stark contrast to the